Whether you're writing a short story or a novel, knowing how to write good dialogue in a story is pivotal to writing something that keeps the reader engaged and invested, and more importantly, keeps the reader coming back for your next book. You may say, Keith, I write good dialogue already. Well, if that's true, now that you know how important dialogue is, would you like some tips and tricks on how to write better dialogue? Go from writing good dialogue to writing gooder dialogue. What? It's a video on dialogue, not grammar. Here are 8 writing tips for how to write good dialogue in a story. Number 1, know the background of your characters. Age, ethnicity, education level, economic status, and occupation. These all affect our experiences and in turn, how we speak as individuals. Also, our language and accents, they're affected by where we live, our country, our region, even city versus country. Here's an example. A roughneck working on oil rigs in Texas isn't going to speak the same as an uptown banker. Even little subtle differences in things like saying soda versus pop. Personally, I like to keep a spreadsheet where I log all this information for all of my main characters, secondary characters, and even some of my tertiary characters depending on how they affect the other characters. Yeah, I know that does sound like a bit of extra work, and more importantly, extra work that most readers won't even notice. But that right there is the point, because that means that my characters don't feel written, they feel real. So taking that extra work is worth it to me. Number 2, make your characters different and unique. Different voices and dialogue is super important. In real life, even family members don't talk the same way. Think about your own family, your siblings, your parents, your aunts and uncles, your kids. Everyone has their own little quirks and nuances. So here's how you can test out your own current writing. If you took out all the dialogue tags in your story, would your reader still be able to tell who's speaking? That's the sign of writing good dialogue. If not, well, now you know how to fix it. Tip number 3, get nosy. One of my favorite pastimes is to people watch. Whether I'm at the park, the store, a theme park, it doesn't matter. I love watching people interact with one another, listening to how they talk, and watching how they talk. That's right, many people, like myself, talk with their hands, some more aggressively than others. Shout out to my fellow Italians. But watching and listening to how people interact is a great way to make your dialogue sound more authentic and more real. When you're listening to other people's conversation, can you guess where they're from? What they do for a living? And what made you come to that conclusion? Is it the way they're dressed? Maybe their accent? Do you see how this can really help create much deeper characters? Now, I'm not suggesting that you carry around a 3-ring binder everywhere you go. I usually carry around a little notebook with me. I usually have it in my back pocket. Those little assignment pads that we had back in elementary school. If you know what I'm talking about, hit that thumbs up one time. And if you don't know what I'm talking about, well, then shoot, now you make me feel old. So hit that like button 3 times to show me that you really don't think I'm old. And if you think I'm old, well, then that's just not nice, and hit it 5 times. When I have that notebook, I just jot down some general notes when something catches my attention. If I see a big burly guy who looks like he could be a lumberjack, and then I hear him speak and he sounds like a typical surfer dude from the valley, well, you better believe I'm writing that sucker down. Little quirks like that can really help your characters become unique and, more importantly, memorable. Now, a little side note, you don't want to have a lot of those quirks with the same character, and you don't want to have a lot of quirky characters in your story, or it could just seem silly, unless that's what you're going for. Tip number 4, relationships matter. Not only does everyone speak differently than each other, but their dialogue also changes depending on who they're talking to. You don't talk to your spouse the same way you talk to your boss. I mean, at least I hope you don't. Even in school, I'm sure you spoke differently to the teachers than you did to your friends, and probably even spoke differently to each teacher. Some teachers are more approachable and relaxed and conversational, while others are more stern and rigid. So if you want to write better dialogue, vary up each character's dialogue depending on who they're talking to. Tip number 5, no one's perfect. That's right, in real life, no one's perfect. Neither should your characters be. If a character's put on the spot, caught off guard, or just placed in an awkward situation, show this in their dialogue. Have them stutter or stammer their words. Maybe have them just stand there with a blank look on their face. Or have them quickly change subjects So make your characters more relatable and make your dialogue better by mimicking these responses and reactions to those awkward moments. Number 6, and this is a biggie, dialogue isn't always best. I know this whole video is on how to write good dialogue in a story, but sometimes the best way to write better dialogue is to not write dialogue. One of the quickest ways to turn off a reader is to bore them with mundane conversation. No one wants to read a bunch of, hey, how are you? What's new? How's the weather? Blah, blah, blah. That's boring and it doesn't move the story along. So when you have a boring dialogue scene, rewrite it as a narrative instead of dialogue and see if the story is the same. 9 times out of 10, it'll probably turn out better without changing anything major in the story. Now, when it comes to dialogue tags, they're okay to use, but use responsibly. Many times action tags can actually say the same thing, but in a more powerful way than a normal dialogue tag. For example, stop, Eddie said, slamming his fist on the table, can be rewritten as stop, Eddie demanded, and it's the same thing, but with a lot more power behind it. I don't have to say all that because I say he demanded it. Like, it shows the emphasis in just that one word. Now, all that said, don't worry about using the word said if you have to. As readers, we're so used to the word said that it's virtually invisible to us. So using it won't take away from your story. It just doesn't add anything to it. So just try and replace it with a more powerful word if you can, but if you can't, the word said is completely fine. Also, if you want to avoid confusing your readers, anytime you switch between characters speaking, start a new line. This way, it's easier for the reader to keep track of who's talking. Are you liking what I'm throwing down so far? If you'd like those 6 tips, then make sure that you subscribe to the channel and smash your little bell icon so you get alerted every time I put out a new video, just like this one. So tip number 7 is talk at people. When you walk up to someone you know, how often do you actually say their name? Think about it. Chances are, not very often. Typically, we talk at people instead of to them. Whether it's right or wrong, that's what we do naturally. We don't name drop as much as we tend to do when we're writing dialogue. So let's change that, shall we? When I walk out to get the mail and I see my neighbor, I don't usually say, "Good morning, Mark. How are you today? How are Stephanie and the kids?" I usually wave and I say, "Hey, what's up?" You see, it accomplishes the same tasks, but in a more realistic, familiar way. And familiar means that it keeps them engaged in your story. It doesn't sound odd or unusual. Now, that being said, this was actually a terrible example because that was a boring scene that should be replaced with a narrative or just removed completely. But the point is, usually with dialogue, you don't need to name drop. Number 8, don't read it out loud. You heard me. Don't read it out loud. One of the writing dialogue tips I hear the most is to read your story out loud. Don't do this. Not when you're trying to figure out dialogue, because if you want good writing advice, have someone else read it out loud to you. Stay with me for a second. See, you wrote the dialogue. You're familiar with the conversations that are there. So if you read the conversation, even if it's out loud, there's a really good chance that you're going to unintentionally read it how you meant it to sound and not how it's actually written in the story. So by having someone else unfamiliar with the story read it out loud, you can hear how it actually is going to sound to your reader. You can write the best dialogue in the world, but that doesn't mean that readers are going to enjoy your book. The best way to keep your reader turning the pages and reaching for that next book is to write characters your reader will love. Check out this video right here where I give you tips and tricks on how to write a likable character. Now, if you've already seen that video or your characters are squishy and squashy and lovable already, well then check out this video right here that YouTube says is perfect for you. I'll catch you in one of these videos, and remember to write right.